it would seem our social constructs, like what you mentioned in terms of government and this tendency in government and all civilizations towards, it would seem, hyper bureaucratization.
Yeah.
It appears that there's something there psychologically that's triggering it. And by psychologically, we're talking about the very primordial sort of psychological conditions and components that make up the human condition. It ties in so much with what I experienced today at that CIOB. I want your take on this, but before I ask your take on that, it makes me wonder about this Gnostic principle of the syzygies, which is the sort of couplings of eons. Yeah. And again, there's this sort of idea of, again, like the Y principle the Lichtenberg pattern that you see throughout nature, almost written into the fabric of everything. There's this almost need, this involuntary need to fracture oneself and to have reflections of oneself, within one's psyche. So for it, one example of that in the external environment is the sun and the moon. Of course, I mean, this is all semiotics, right? This is how man can't really is one thing I agree with Schopenhauer fully on, is that he stated something along the lines of man cannot, I'm paraphrasing, but he says man cannot understand anything outside of man. Everything within, everything that man understands of the external world can only be known from man's standpoint, from his phenomenal basis of understanding. He can never truly know of the noumenon. He can never really truly know of it as an in terms of measuring it, of quantifying it, because the dimensionality of it is completely beyond him. It's incomprehensible. It's ineffable, right? So I agree if I'm there. I don't know if you have any comments to put.
Well,
to that.
I would say, to that, I would say that although it is correct and accurate to say that man can never truly understand, I mean, fully understand the whole, let's say, the entirety, man can, however, act in accordance with it. Okay, these are two different things. One thing is to know, another thing is to act in accordance. Right? So you don't need to know exactly how wind is generated in nature, for example, right? But you can act in accordance to the wind, for example, to sail a boat, right? So you know that if you put the sail in a certain position, the boat will move. If you move the sail to a different position, the boat will stop. So
yeah, you know it from a sort of deeply experiential or just, again, like what you're saying, you don't have to actually figure out or measure.
Right.
The actual
right. Measure or know the essence of, right? So that is the distinction that I always put between, again, ego and mental personality, because at mental personality, the abandonment gives a need to try to know. And why? Because the authority is missing. The authority of the ego is missing. And therefore, if the authority is there, you receive the instructions, quote unquote, and I'm using instruction because that was the word you used on the tarot series. You receive the instructions saying, well, in accordance to the essence, the action is this, right? And you don't need to know why the action is that. That's where the faith or trust plays a part, right? So you have faith that the way ahead is in accordance to your inner authority, right? If you don't have that inner authority, or not, when I say not have as being dormant, what happens is that there's this need to know as much as possible to make a decision, right? It's what usually is called in social terms an informed decision, which we've heard a lot in 2020 and other instances, but especially 2020, if you recall, right? And of course, this informed decision implies that the information that you are getting is accurate, which it isn't, because the mental personality is mostly blind, even more blind than the ego is, right? So it can't really quantify or measure information in order to make that quote unquote informed decision. The only way to make a quote unquote informed decision is to awaken the ego and be connected to the essential self. So, in that regard, I would say that I would just make a distinction between the knowing itself as a, I agree with that part, that humans, even with the ego, they can't know fully. But the distinction is then to, do you act in balance and in accordance with the essence, with the whole? And if so, then you are harmonized, if you like. You are in a state of balance, of harmony with your individualized manifestation, I would say. So that would be my comment. I don't know if it was clear.
Oh no, absolutely. There was something else I was going to ask, and it sort of ties into everything that we were talking about. And it's, well, firstly, this is a sort of a multi-part question, but so for the first part of it is, how would you define? Because you mentioned quite a lot regarding this idea of false memories. How
Yes.
would you define that? And then secondly, how would these false memories, how would they be produced, or how would they protrude from the mental characters? Be them, negative or positive mental characters, or yeah.
Okay. Well, the false memory, in summarized way, the false memory is a lie that we believe in and that acts as a foundation for behavior, for thinking, for habits, everything that then makes up the mental personality. Okay. So, for example, I don't know if I should say this word because we're recording, but
I'll edit it out.
particulate pathogens cause illness. Okay, this is a belief that acts as a foundation for behavior, for thinking, and for habits. Right? If you have a basis, a foundational belief that there's a hidden microscopic enemy out to get you, right? Your behavior is going to be dictated by that. You are going to do things that you normally wouldn't, that you organically wouldn't. You are going to prevent yourself from doing things that you organically would, for example, right? And that builds a character, a personality, right, on top of that. So that is why that in my schematics, I've put the memory room in the subconscious. So in my schematics, it is actually above. And without the filter of the ego, to reevaluate if that memory is true or false, because that would require the intervention of the ego to filter it and to decide upon it. The mental character takes it as a belief that is true, okay, as a fact, as a foundational fact. And that foundational fact builds the character traits, the habits, the behaviors, the ways of thinking. And so it affects deeply how the mental characters not only interact internally, but then of course behave externally. I don't know if that was clear, or if you need more clarification.
No, absolutely, it's clear. So it's this idea that, again, it's almost you almost are informed, because if we just break down that, I guess it would be like a portmanteau or a compounded word. That idea of informed, you are informed because you're in the world, or in
Yes.
the you're almost reveling in the form.
Yeah.
If we inhabit
Even
a
if
world
it's
of
false.
forms,
Yeah,
yes,
even if it's a false form.
false, yeah. So, but the form again isn't a tangible form. This is where we have to make the distinction. It's a
Correct.
form of the mind. So it's literally like a manacle or a shackle upon the mind, which then dictates, again, the direction you're going. So in that sense, these false memories are almost, they almost produce, they give birth to the false mental personalities, because the false mental
Absolutely.
personalities are what protect these mental forms, these false memories, right?
Yeah. Listen, another false memory is you are Scottish and I'm Portuguese. And now this is going to say, no, but I was born in Scotland. Well, the idea that that piece of land that you were born in and that I was born in is called Scotland and Portugal is a concept that was applied upon. It's not an organic thing. There's nothing organically saying that this is Scotland and that is Portugal, right? So by that, just by that, and this is, a mere example, you have a false memory that dictates personality, right? So you are Scottish. You look at yourself, you look at your history, you look at your culture, you look at all these things that come with the word Scotland. And I the same with Portugal, right? And my education was related to being Portuguese, your education was related to being Scottish, and so on and so forth. And Noble, that is listening, was, his education was as being an American. And then there's the particularities of each state that you're born in the US, because it's almost a continent. So these are also false memories, and they are false. Why? Is it because you weren't born in that particular piece of land? No, it's because the attribution of a characteristic or a name or a definition to that particular piece of land brings with it a whole paraphernalia of, behavior, cultural influences, even religions, and so on and so forth, that organically wouldn't be there. You understand?
I also sort of experience this when I'm playing RPGs. So well, less so now. Well, actually, tell a lie. I was playing the new Kingdom Come Deliverance #2, and I had that same feeling that I got, in sort of days of yore when I was an adolescent, playing like Skyrim. And again, so in Skyrim, you choose, two sides of either side of the Civil War, right? And again, both sides are exactly the same. This is the irony of the video game, I guess. But you sort of craft your character, you craft your role-playing experience, which is, of course, you could say quite similar to how life is. You craft it to that character that you basically are projecting onto the screen through your actions. Arguably, that's what we're doing. Is sort of
Exactly.
perceptual vehicles of this spark of the spirits of that which is primordial.
Yes, and that is the virtual reality. That is the actual virtual reality that we experience. It is a perception-based virtual reality, and I think that this is the fallacy that the
We must.
simulationists.
Yeah, I was just about to say that. We must stress it's not, when we say virtual reality, we don't mean simulation theory.
I was going to say that because that is the fallacy that the simulationists fall into, which is to confuse the perception-based virtual reality with an actual digital or whatever means virtual reality.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's the same thing that the Kabbalists do as well. They materialize, a very spiritual individual journey towards individuation.
Yeah, they literalize. That's the word I used. Make it literal, right?
Exactly.
And when you make it literal, it loses all symbolic. And so the virtual reality exists, and has always existed in the sense of a perception-based virtual reality that is, again, based upon false memories, right? Again, just a simple thing like nationality, like, I don't know, the language that you speak. That is also a false memory, because if you all it took was for you to be born on a different piece of land and you would speak a different language, right? So all of these dictate a false memory that then dictates the character. And that is, I think, the true meaning of that famous passage in the Bible of, let us go down and confuse their language, right?
Yes, exactly.
In the sense of they are too organic for a mental personality. The egos are too dangerous. The Christs in the world are too dangerous for the mental character, for those who are abandoned. And so we need to confuse and bring them down to our level, like a bully would do, so that, we're all at the same level, or even we can surpass them, right? We as the controllers, those languages, those confused languages, we can surpass and confuse them. I think Noble wants to speak.
Hey, what's happening, fellas?
Hello.
Hey, Matt.
It's good. Well, good to see your icons here and to hear your voice. Hey, so for the benefit of brushing me up on your model, Armunn, it's been a while since we dove into it together, and I certainly do appreciate it. I relate to it greatly, although it varies from some of the models that are out there in the sphere, right? And so, for the benefit of brushing me up, and then also for anybody that may be listening going forward to this recording, can you just take us up another level into the ego and your I guess you could say the way that you frame it into your model? Because oftentimes, as we know, the ego gets a bad rap and gets demonized, and then in your case, if I recall right, it acts as a filter, and it gives us perspective and etc. So could you
Yeah,
give us a
the
moment
ego is the
on that?
authority. I actually already touched on that before you came in, but problem repeating. The ego is the authority, is the legitimate authority of the psyche, individualized. And the metaphor that I used when I explained it to my views to Silas previously was the Christian gospel metaphor, right? So you would have Christ as the ego. Christ is equivalent to the ego. And Christ is always in contact and acting on behalf of the Father, the God, which there represents the essential self, right? And Christ then, below, or whichever way you want to see it, has the disciples or the apostles that are the mental characters of the psyche, right? And so the mental characters require the authority of the Christ, require the authority of the ego. The mental personalities require the authority of the ego to act in accordance to the essential self, or God in the metaphor, right? When the ego is absent, they are left abandoned. They are in a position where they have to make their own interpretations of what they think the ego meant, or what they think the ego would decide in that situation, right? And this skews already the actual connection to the essential self, because the ego is not supposed to leave, or like in the story, be crucified. I think that is a falsified ending to that story. I think the correct ending to that story is that Christ is coronated. Christ is given the throne, let's say, and of course we are talking metaphorically of the psyche. He is given the legitimate throne of the psyche. The authority sits on the throne, and he is the ruler of, on behalf of the essence. He is the representative of the essence, right? So therefore, that is why I emphasize so much and re-emphasize the importance, the key importance of awakening the ego individually in the psyche, because it is the actual place of authority that is always, irrevocably in contact with the essential self. And so by connecting to the ego, by connecting to that inner authority, you are automatically in connection with the essential self. Now, that doesn't mean that the mental character is able to know everything in the sense of, oh, I am doing this because it will cause this result. You know, you don't know this. That is where faith comes in, right? But you know that this is the right action because your authority, your inner told you it is, you know, in the sense of you trust, you have faith in your inner authority. You understand? I don't know if this clarified it for you, but.
Oh, beautifully. Thank you. And so just to relate this to, say, the model one's lower self versus their higher self, right? You'll hear people speak to that model. So is it simply the characters are of the lower personality, whereas the higher self would be this egoic authority? Is that fair to say?
Correct. The problem with those visions, they usually equate the lower personality with the ego. And the ego is the in-between. So he cannot and should not be equated with the lower, right? He is not of the higher either, in the sense of he is not the essence, but he is the in-between. He is the key. I mean, even Christ says that he is the way, right? He is the path and the way, or something like that, right? So he is the channel, let's say, that between the essence and the mental personality. So he is not of the higher either, per se, but he is the facilitator, the one that allows the higher to be, directing the lower. Because the higher needs the lower and the lower needs the higher. This must be understood. The idea is not to eliminate the lower. The lower only becomes grotesque due to abandonment, due to not being in relation to the higher. You understand? That is why shadows grow grotesque, because they are rejected, they are abandoned, they are cast out to quote unquote hell, right? And so they live in hell. And by living in hell, of course, you become grotesque, right? And you grow this hatred towards that abandoned you, right? So it is by reestablishing that connection to the ego that you automatically reestablish the connection to the essential self. But the ego itself is not of the higher either, but he's certainly not of the lower. And one of the common mistakes I see in those ideas of lower and higher self is that the ego is always consistently included in the lower self. And this to me is a mistake.
Yeah, most certainly is. And so, yeah, Jesus, the way, the truth, the light. No one gets to the Father except through me, right? So, Taparat, right? The Son, the Taparat.
Mhm.
Very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. And please continue, guys. So, Silas, thank you for letting me jump in there.
No, it's okay, man. There was something I want you to re-clarify as well, Armunn, because I think it's quite a profound point, and it's good that we're recording this now, you know, for posterity's sake. And it was that point regarding that I mentioned, you know, it's almost like these mental personalities, it's the fracturing, almost like the Gnostic syzygy. It's the fracturing, the continual fracturing, the continual complicating of that which primordially was rather simple. It was innocent, if you will, right? Before it fell from heaven. So you tagged this in with bureaucracy and bureaucratization. I think there's, it'd be quite interesting for the listeners to hear your points regarding that. How does this psychological idea of false the false mental image and the false memory and those ideas and the fracturing of the ego into these mental personalities, how does that relate to the social constructs of man, and specifically, for example, bureaucratization and such?
Yeah, well, bureaucracy has mainly to do, always to do with security, right? Be it security for the collective, be it security at an individual level, right? Depending on which way you're acting upon. It always represents a missing authority. And it is security for example, if you have this belief that there are constant, again, like I used for the particulate pathogens, if you socially believe that there's always an enemy out there out to get you, right? Plotting to, call them terrorists, call them an enemy nation, call them whatever, but they're out to get you, you have to increase the checkpoints, let's say, and therefore increase the level of bureaucracy to make you feel more secure, right? In the sense of, okay, I will need these extra checks, so extra documents, extra, processes, extra verification, so on and so forth, that requires therefore extra departments, extra personnel, and so on, extra policing, and so on and so forth, which correlates therefore with the idea that you have to, the mental personality has to feel secure, okay? Which it will never happen. It will never happen. And the feeling of insecurity at the mental personality level stems solely from the absence of the connection to the ego, which is the authority, right? It is the same, exactly the same as, a child goes to a big, huge mall with his parents, right? And that child, for some reason, gets distracted and loses track of his parents, right? From that moment on, that child will be insecure. And there's nothing the child can do that will actually resolve the security or the insecurity feeling other than finding the parents again, right? So bureaucracy works in the same way. It is the attempt to give a sense of security to a mental personality, to a child. More than a child, I would call it an actual original AI, if you like, which is a sort of a child, if you look at it from a certain angle. And it's by no accident that the first, I think it was one of the first AI movies, was represented by a child, right? I don't know if you recall that movie AI with the kid. It's an attempt to make the child feel secure, which is impossible to do. It can decrease the insecurity a little bit. It can give a sense of, oh, yes, okay, with this in place, I feel more secure. But it will never actually resolve the problem at its core. And the problem at its core is the absence of the parents, or metaphorically, which represents metaphorically the absence of the ego authority. So absence of ego equates always with complexity, making it more complex at a social level so that it decreases or appeases a little bit the feeling of insecurity that stems from it.
And in many ways as well, if we even look at this, perhaps power and psychological warfare, perhaps that is, of course, it's in the business of generating that need for security, right? With the tabloids and the sort of terror-stricken population and the terror-stricken headlines that creates that terror-stricken population.
False memories, again.
False memories, yeah. But perhaps power as well has its own false memory. It's almost like a vicious cycle where it's the powerful seek that same security because they have these ideas, be them strong potentials or not, that they will be overthrown. So therefore, everything that they do is to produce more security for themselves, which in time, like what you state, it actually it produces less security, not just for themselves, but for the entire species, less productivity, less predictability. Another thing that you mentioned too, pardon, is if we look at civilizations, and I've thought about this, for example, even this idea of what it means to be British, right?
Mhm.
Now, that's something that's quite modern. I would say I'd say maybe pre-1905 or somewhere around about that time, the turn of the 20th century. People on these islands, including Ireland, saw themselves as Irish, Scottish, English, or Welsh, or Manx or Cornish to a lesser extent as well. There was no real British identity. I mean, it was called Britain, but that was more a geographical place name rather than an identity. Of course, as we've become more pluralistic as a society, and this really started with the Empire and the Commonwealth, we've taken on this sort of, again, this false memory, right? Which arguably is a false memory of a false memory if we even understand that perhaps Scottish
Spiral.
or
The
whatever
spiral.
exactly a spiral, a toroid, a vortex, right? It makes one wonder, and I've thought this idea of, for example, civic nationalism, that you can bring individuals into the nation and have them sort of get on board this sort of, again, this really false memory, this total abstraction. And I mean total abstraction as in it's intangible of British. If you know, will that wane over time? Do false memories wane over time? Or
Yes.
I
Yes.
don't.
Mhm.
But if they wane, do they wane just outright? Do they meaning either eradicate themselves or nullify themselves? In terms of their ability to reproduce themselves generationally and going forward, or do they mutate?
Mutate. Yeah.
Right.
There are two comments I would like to offer to that. The first one is for your the exertion of power always brings out a paranoid state. Always. I mean, there's no instance of someone in a position of power that doesn't eventually become paranoid about losing that power, right? So the point that you were making before about we will be overthrown or whatever stems from a paranoia that stems from the blindness of the absence of authority, of internal authority, right? Because when you are in contact with the internal authority, you don't need to control or AKA think all the ramifications, right? You only become paranoid or have this need of thinking that you know, right? Surveillance, checks, constant, ideas that you know what everybody is doing around you, and this paranoia only comes with the position of power. Okay, that is the first one. The second one is, yes, they mutate. They wane because truth is self-evident, right? You don't need to reinforce truth. Truth needs to be observed once, and it stays there, and it's immutable, and it will never change. Otherwise, it wouldn't be true, by definition, right? Something that is true means that it's true now. It was true 100 years ago. It will be true 100, and so on and so forth, right? Lies, however, or falsity, requires constant reinforcement. So false memories require to be constantly reinforced. That's why you have newspapers, media, social media, and so on and so forth, and even social interactions of a certain programming quality, right? So, like collective kind of programming events and that sort of thing. So false memories require constant reinforcement. What happens after a while is that false memories start losing their power as generations go by. And so the solution that, let's say, the mental personality level system encounters is to from time to time mutate the false memories so that they appear that they, oh no, now we've let go of the false and we're entering the true, right? Or like you've heard recently, we're entering the golden age, right? Or we're entering the best period ever, you know, the age of Aquarius, or the age of this, or the age of that, you know, the age of revelation, where everything is finally true. No, it's a mutation, because you cannot know truth directly as a mental personality, but you can act in accordance with it. And to act in accordance with it, you don't need to know it. You just need to understand the authority and trust it, or have faith, if you like, in that authority. So my answer to your second point is they wane, and the solution that they found to that waning is a mutation, different kind of set of false memories, which you also see, for example, in 1984, in the novel, right? Where you see O'Brien. Is it O'Brien, his name? The guy that tortures. He's O'Brien, right? The other one is Winston, and correct me if I'm wrong. I think he's O'Brien, the guy from the party that is torturing Winston. He says that, well,
O'Brien, yeah.
O'Brien, we make the world flat, or the world round, or, you know, the moon is close or is far away as we decide, right? The party decides, right? So what is he saying there? He's saying that they command the perception false memories, right? They change the false memories. The departments change the information in the historical record, and therefore you mutate false memories to whatever you like, right? It doesn't make them true, and it means that they have to be reinforced. Hence you had all those rituals like the 15 minutes of hate or 5 minutes of hate that they had, and so on and so forth, right? So these are mere, of course, examples using that novel that, of course, was propagandized for a reason, to introduce by itself also false memories if they are unchecked and unverified by the ego. But once you read them correctly, it is not that they are programming the inevitability of such a state of things, right? It is that they are trying to make people buy what they're selling, right? And for that, they need to, for people to cooperate. They need for people to, okay, yes, I prefer not to listen to my authority. I prefer to disconnect myself as a mental personality from my inner authority and listen to this external authority, even if it's from an oppositional side, because that's what we see in, the truthers, right? The truthers that are continuously, going around in circles of the government this and the aliens that, rabbit holes and so on. Yeah, even if you're in an oppositional stance, which is also the same thing inverted, right? You are still buying false memories, just from the other end of the spectrum, right? So,
well,
again,
it's like what we were. Sorry, finish your point, man.
No, it's just saying that it mutates. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's like what we were saying as well. It's this idea of the fracture and the complication.
Correct.
Of that which was simple into that which, well, is now like what you're saying. It's in a sort of mutated state of, unnecessary complication. And another thing to mention as well is that, again, it's everything that we see in the world is based around this idea of the one fragments into two, the two fragments into four, sort of a drive of exponentiality. And in this exponentiality, it's sort of right at its base essence, it seems to indicate that they are, again, like Cassiopeia looking into the mirror, or Sophia being tricked to look into the water, and her reflection being captured by Yaldabaoth, right, in the Gnostic myth. Again, these are metaphors that really seem to around this notion that everything in the world, of course, the sun and the moon is another example, it must have its counterpoint. It must have its reflection. It almost, perhaps it needs it almost like a ship needs both a rudder and a helmsman, right? So again, in that sense, if you look at the boat as the ego, then perhaps we, again, in its very base essence, even of our own self, we need perhaps that, again, it needs to be controlled by the ego, but we need that part of ourselves which is free form or free flowing. And then we need the other part which is limitable. It is almost like it acts like a dam. It's injects self-critique every once in a while to maintain, again, to control and maintain the multiplication of our mental characters, right?
And listen, there is a healthy, because okay, I've been going on about mental personalities and ego, but it must be understood that there is a healthy place for mental personality. So mental personality is not to be excluded. Quite the contrary, it is to be included, but it is to be included in its proper place, right? So you don't, I mean, if you have a dog, right? The dog is not supposed to, although some do, is not supposed to be the ruler of the house, right? The dog has a place, and he is happy in that place, and he is best in that place, and he fits, and he has a healthy relationship with the human, right? So in the same sense, if you make equivalent the mental personality with the dog, right, and the ego with the master owner of the dog, whatever you want to call it, then it becomes more clear, right? There is a place for the dog. The dog is needed. He is necessary for the proper internal family function, let's say. But he is just, if he feels abandoned, and there are many ways to feel abandoned. You can be abandoned in the presence, right? You could, have you ever been with someone that you are physically there, but you feel that like the person is out, right? Like the person is not there for you or with you, right? Mm-hmm. So it can be an abandonment in presence. But the dog feels like, for example, the dog feels the master is absent even though he is present physically. The dog will take over. The dog will try to take over. Is he equipped to do that? No. He will only do make wrong decisions and make things worse, right? He will wreak havoc trying to be the master, right? But he only does so because of the absence of that authority. Excuse me, of that authority. Right? So I think that this has to be made clear. Oh fuck! My cat just threw something on the ground. But it had to be made clear that there is a healthy place for the mental personality. Sorry about that. One of my cats is in heat, and she's wreaking havoc because she can't.
Right, okay.
She can't find what she's looking for.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I guess we've all been there. Not quite in the same way, but
yeah.
That's funny. So if I can summarize, so we spoke the mental characters, the personality. We spoke of the ego. We've attributed this to the microcosm or us as human beings. We've spoke to it as in the macrocosm, like the with the questions with regard to bureaucracy of the governed and the governed and those who govern, and then the offshoot of that, which is power. And so, and the necessity of this, and the necessity of this. Can we go up another tier, Armunn? Can we speak to how would the observer or the witness fall into your model when we when we step into the realm of our truest essence, so to speak.
I am sorry. I was taking care of.
The cat eat.
I am so sorry because yeah, the cat is a bit.
The cat does not know its place, Armunn.
Yeah, no, I mean
Yeah.
the thing is, I don't believe in whatever you call it, castrating animals, and so in these moments, they're out of their minds, which is understandable given that their instinct is kicking in. So I have to be a bit more understanding than in other times, right? But sorry, Noble, just repeat your question. I'm terribly sorry.
No, quite all right. Understood. Interesting that the cat came along as you were using the animal analogy for the in your example there. But yeah, so I was just summarizing for our benefit is we've been talking about your model, the ego. We were speaking of the mental characters and their place, the importance of those characters. We were speaking of obviously the microcosm as us individuals and how this model plays out, and then but also in the macrocosm. Silas was brought up bureaucracy and power and how these things kind of take place on a collective, in the more macro sense. And so I was asking you to now take us up. So we've spoken about the lower self slash the mental characters, the authority of the ego. But what of this next level, this the observer, or when we get into these states of the witness, where somehow we're closer to that, maybe to the source of things. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, like I said before, the essence cannot be directly known by the mind, and therefore cannot be directly known by the mental character. Okay, that can never happen. It does not happen. It's not equipped to know, but it can act in accordance through the inner authority, which, in my view, is performed by the ego. Right. So the mental personality, mental character, if it got the authority, the ego, awakened, trusts the ego, and the ego is the one that is in contact with the essential self. So with that, higher position, if you like. It's again, if you use the metaphor, because it probably makes it easier, if you use the Christian gospel metaphor, and again, this is just a metaphor, I'm not speaking literally, it is the same as Christ was the only one in the story that was in direct contact with the Father, the God, etc. Right? All the others got their instruction from Christ, right? And got their instructions, directions from Christ, their ways of doing things or not doing things and whatever from Christ. But of course, he also said that the things I do, you can do and better, right? Which means that they are the ones that can actually apply directly in the world. The mental personalities exist for that reason. They are the ones that can actually interact with the world, and you call it change the world, call it, whatever you like, correct, whichever way you want to see it. But they are the ones that can actually do. The ego, by itself, can only affect the mental characters. It cannot affect the world per se. Okay, so the world, let's say, in a social sense, belongs to the mental character level, and that there is a healthy place for that. But it has to be through a connection with the authority, the legitimate authority of the ego, that is in connection with the legitimate authority of the essential self. So when you externalize that into governments, institutionalized religions, experts, right? You're externalizing the authority. You're saying, no, these people or these concepts that employ people have authority over my inner one, right? So,
Would you
governments.
say that?
Mm.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Armin.
No,
Finish
go
your
ahead.
point.
No, go ahead.
Do you think the human condition is predisposed towards that type of externalization of, I guess you could say, power in its fundamental sense?
Yeah, well, it is pretty predisposed due to, again, one of the concepts that I go into, due to the problem of pride and shame, right? And that is why I think that the original sin, in the sense of missing the mark, so not in the sense of a bad, a wrong action, but in the sense of missing the mark, the original sin is pride, because pride automatically generates shame, right? And automatically generates a rejection of a healthy part of you that is signaling something that you don't want due to that pride to listen to, right? Imagine that you think, I don't know, you think that you're a great builder, right? So you work in construction. Imagine that you think you're a great builder and so on.
I am a great builder.
And someone that is a healthy part of you, of your team, comes to you and says, yes, Alice, I think you this pillar here, or this foundation, or this thing. And you say, you're telling me that I've made a mistake? You're telling me that this is pride. And what does it lead to? It leads to the rejection of that healthy part. It leads to inevitable disaster when you actually do the construction. And of course, it leads to that rejected part hating you eventually and turning against you eventually, right? Because it needs to be acknowledged back into its healthy position, right? So internally, we also have these functions, let's say, of the psyche that are supposed to contribute in some way, right? But the problem comes from this original sense of pride, right? I know, right? You can recognize a bad teacher by their inability to learn. Okay, a bad teacher is unable to learn. A good teacher is always learning, right? So it is the same thing. If you have solidified, even if what you've obtained is of worth and so on and so forth, if you have solidified your idea, you live in pride. And that pride always casts a rejection, always promotes shame, and will always lead to the crumbling, to, let's say, when we get there, we'll talk about it, but the tarot card of the tower, right?
Yes.
Which everything is destroyed. Due to that idea that no, I have attained, I know. And so that generates, of course, false memories, disconnection with the ego, and so on and so forth. So the predisposition comes from the original predisposition that then, like you said, through syzygies, multiplied from there exponentially, right? So it cascades down. Yeah.
Another thing to mention as well is that I've just been thinking, when you've been speaking about that and the idea of the tower and crumbling, it ties in with what I sort of underwent today in this this, I guess you could call it, meeting or conference rather. Anyway, but there was something I was going to mention, and it's this idea that, harkening back to what you were saying, everything knows its place, right? It has to know its place. You almost, another way that the false memory of this social organism, be it whatever it is, either breaks down or either eradicates itself or of course mutates, that typically is accelerated by inequality. And that inequality isn't just financial, it's inequality on multiple lines, right? Usually it's some form of social inequality. It can be as, as sort of insignificant as, I don't make enough money, therefore I can't have, the same amount of children as, I don't know, Victor in the palatial estate, right? And I don't know, Buckinghamshire or wherever, right?
Yeah, but money is already a false memory applied exactly to dictate who can and who can't, right? Who gets the approval and who doesn't, right?
Exactly.
So it's like, be a good boy for the system and you get more money. Behave badly and you get less, right? So it's already a system of attribution of validation.
But
go ahead.
Do you almost see that there's that inequality is stemming from the inability or the breaking down of that social bargain, that social contract, that again you can comply. And of course, there's a recent example that we can't name because this is going up to YouTube, but that event in 2020 where you had a vast amount of people complying, and it would seem that a lot of unfortunate events befell them. Perhaps as a part of their compliance, right? Perhaps not. Perhaps it was all a coincidence. Who knows, right? But even, well, for example, in this country, you're seeing a breaking down of the yes man culture, the sort of company man. Even in Japan and these other areas, where there's, you're not really getting paid the same amount for that compliance, that social, that validation from the hierarchy. So there's a breaking down there of the social contract, of the social bargain. Do you feel that is that being done by design? Is it something that's conscious? Is it a psychological principle at play?
I would link back to what I've stated previously about, because a social contract implies power, implies the outsourcing of power, right? So I determine that, or we are put into a system that determines that socially or at a collective level, this concept, which could be a police force, it could be government, it could be even religious in nature, holds power externally over me, right? So this is what the social contract means. It means that they will apply the decisions that supposedly make it, a fair social situation for all, right? They are the ones that is their job, supposedly, correct? But this is a position of power. And like I've stated previously, all positions of power lead inevitably to paranoia about losing that power, and lead inevitably, therefore, to misuse of that power, right? You cannot put so much power. I mean, one thing is, okay, you're building a house, and I don't know anything about how to build a house, but you do, right? So I give you a temporary power in the sense of, hey, you know about these things, tell me what, right? And you give me instructions, I follow it, and we build the house, fine. But then after that ends, you don't keep the power over me, right? It was just for the purposes of building the house. What happens is that, okay, I externalize and say, yeah, okay, we are in a difficult situation, sort this out because I don't know about it, right? And then when it ends, you still say, no, but there's this other situation. It's never ending, right? There's this other situation, then this other situation, and you always need them, right? Which leads, of course, to the false events in the media and the false history. Because if you have a position of power, it's in your interest to constantly create a feeling that you're needed. Right? If everything's running smoothly, if everything is fine, then what need is there for you? Right? People will look and say, well, we don't need government. We don't need police. We don't need military. Right? Which doesn't mean that they don't have their healthy uses, right? In a limited, very limited fashion. But in the way that they find themselves in power, it always leads to the paranoia and misuse of that power.
Mm-hmm.
So when you say breaking of the social contract, the social contract itself was already a misuse.
Mm-hmm.
You understand? I mean, you want, it's the same thing as, I overeat, right? And I ask you to resolve the overeating for me. I ask you to police me how much I eat. Do you understand the problem here?
Yes.
Because if I'm over... Sorry.
Technically, the system at play has actually, we've encountered that with Ozempic.
With what?
Ozempic, it's almost like a God, what is it? What's it called? It's like a needle they inject themselves, people that are obese, and the Ozempic chemically, it basically chemically inhibits fat growth, or something along those lines. Yeah, sorry, I was just thinking that's already sort of that idea, and again, it's like a hierarchy. The pharmaceutical company who creates Ozempic, or the pharmaceutical companies that create Ozempic, have almost got that power over the people who are obese, right?
It's not almost. They do. They do. Right? And so that is the thing. I mean, you imagine how much power that is. You ask me to resolve something that is related to your own willpower. It only means that you are completely disconnected with your center of authority, because otherwise you would have the willpower to change whatever needed to be changed. And of course, you could ask for my help. That is a different thing. Okay? A different thing is, hey, listen, help me out, I overeat. Help me out here with some tips, some advice. But it always has to come from your will. You can't outsource your will. You shouldn't outsource your will. And that is what happens always with governments, institutionalized religions, everything. Expert-based mentalities, be it science, be it whatever. Right? You externalize that willpower. So tell me what to will.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Tell me what to will and what I can't and can't will. Right? So that is exactly, thy will be done. Thy will be done. Yeah. Which of course sorry.
No, please finish your idea there, Armunn.
Now, I was just going to say, which in the contextual idea of the metaphor that thy will be done here means the essential self, the will of the essential self, right? But of course, in institutionalized religions, the way it has been viewed, it is the externalized, of course. Go on.
Oh, well, maybe I can tie these ideas together. I was just going to quote Aleister Crowley, right? It's like, do art thou will, that's the whole of the law. But relating it back to this current externalizing one's authority. Here's the example of the social contract, right? And then beautifully said, by the way. And so now we're moving into the next evolution of that, right? The smart contract. That we're removing the human altogether, seemingly, or at least in theory, that's how the smart contract's supposed to work. It's automated, right? AI automation. But so I'd like you guys' thoughts on that. just further going down this proverbial rabbit hole from the natural organic existence, essence, etc., down deeper into the bowels of density. In this case, synthetic, automated, artificial intelligence. But before you respond to that, I just wanted to make sure that I was clear, Armunn, on this last piece of your model here. Or maybe it's not the last piece, but the last piece we spoke to before we moved into pride. It was you were speaking to my question with regards to the witness or the observer or the essence, and you suggested that the mental, or you reminded us that the mental characters, by their very nature of the mind, they can't know or fully know the essence, right? It's just inherently can't do that. I was going to suggest that using the Jesus metaphor that you brought forth to help us understand this, Jesus representing the heart or the sun, or in the Kabbalistic tree of life, Tapareth, right? That intermediary between the lower self and the higher self, representing the heart. And then, so I just got out of a 10-day meditation retreat, and of course it's Eastern centric, in its teachings and practices and whatnot, Eastern yogic centric, right? And the whole idea is to move from the mind, essentially move out of one's mind down into the heart to aspire to ultimately a more full, or a full connection to that essence, right? And then ultimately, for those that have worked hard enough and long enough, the idea is to realize some sort of samadhi, right? Which is an experiential knowing of an undescribable with the intellect experiential knowing of oneself, like its highest essence, right? And so let me ask you, did I understand you correctly? And does my extension there do your model well? And then maybe you could go jump back to the smart contracts and AI.
Yes, in a way, it's very accurate. The idea of I would just comment in the last part in regards to those who have worked. I have usually, my observation is that it doesn't require any work. What I mean by that is, if you have to work for something, it means that you're programming yourself in regards to another different false memory. Because again, truth is self-evident, right? If you recognize something as, at the very least, truer, or which could be false, which could be put less false, it should be enough for you to recognize and decide upon. And that's it. Okay. If it's something that requires a sort of new programming, it usually means, okay, I'm generalizing, it usually means that it's probably a replacement of a false memory with a different one. So I have sort of a bad relationship with that idea of, I'm working towards the samadhi or the whatever. It is not work, in my opinion. It is just, you either see or you don't. And of course you can see and reject, which is even worse. Okay. Because one thing is to be blind, another thing is to see and still decide to refuse, right? But I think you understand what I mean, right?
Yeah, totally. I can see where maybe the choice of words, work, would be, it's another way of saying doing as opposed to being.
Right.
We are
Right.
that. We are that. Yes. No, I'm tracking with you. I just, for example, there was an unfoldment unfoldment of your model, for example. Some people might inadvertently call that work. For you, it seems to me like it's been a labor of love. It was an unfoldment of understanding of you, of who you are essentially, and now you're expressing it to us in this meaningful way on this podcast. So yeah, no, I'm not suggesting that. Yeah, I understand exactly how the pitfalls of doing this in order to yeah. So thank you for pointing that out. I think that's a good idea to be clear on that.
I know that these are just words anyway, but it's something that we hear a lot in like New Age circles and that kind of thing, which is continue your work towards, like, for example, meditation is work, in that sense. And I have a sort of a bad relationship with that concept because it is not work. When you see, you can decide to act in accordance or not, right? And if you act in accordance, things don't require much time to change, right? They don't require that much time to change. Of course, they may not change fully. They may not change fully in the sense of, overnight you have completely become enlightened and whatever. No, but they change that part that you realized. They completely change from one day to the next. And it even may look like, oh, yesterday is a lifetime, right? Because there was a sort of mental character death and rebirth, if you like. But I know that at the end of the day, these are just words. Like Silas said, words are concepts, and we have to make sure that at least we're referring to the same concepts, lest there be confusion, which is already confusing enough to communicate. So if we can diminish the amount of confusion that emerges from communication through words, that would be even better, right?
Yeah, no doubt. Shared understanding of the meaning that we give to certain words, and just as a quick note, it's really interesting that this tributary that we're taking here with regards to this, because I was listening to I guess you can call him a teacher for lack of a better, or it's for what it's worth, I consider the three of you on this call as to be teachers in many ways. So, but he was speaking to indirectly to what we're talking about, and he maintained the importance of having fun, of the playfulness, right? Is like of a child. The child gets up and is ready to go embrace what the world a day has for him, and can't wait to get out of bed and get done with breakfast and brush his teeth and go out into the world, right? And there's no work involved. There's just an unfoldment or a becoming or a being. And yeah, I thought it was interesting that this guy said, hey, look, for those of you who are trying to work towards this, you're being laborious. It's becoming rigid. I've found that you're more apt to not kind of reach this objective, which it seems to me is your objective is just to know thyself, right? And so it's if perhaps you need to come at this in a different way, and then that different way is the playfulness, the having fun. And if it's not there, then perhaps this isn't the path, or this isn't the modality, the tool, the practice, whatever for you. So anyway, enough said on that.
Yeah, the thing about the being like a is because the self just is, right? And the child just is. The child doesn't know what the day will bring, right? He may even make plans that, yeah, I'm gonna play football in the street, but then he gets there, it's raining, so he decides, no, I'll after all play another thing with my friends, or whatever. So it's this being like a child means that you have the ability to improvise and to not be limited by what again, the plans that the mental character did, right? Which again play into the safeguards that we were talking about, even at the social, right? The safeguards that that make the living complex and disciplined, and tries to discipline everything, and everything has to be predictable. Everything has to be, put into categories and so on and so forth, right? And this is not how a child operates. And that's why I think that there's this comparison or metaphor of being like a child, because a child is able to, perform their day, if you like, in an improvised manner. And this is why I've applied in my own life the attempt of, even in these conversations, and Silas can attest to that, even in the series that we do on the tarot and all that, to always go unprepared in the sense of, I don't take previous notes and, oh, I must say this, I must remember to say that and whatever. No, I just go with it. And this is something that I've applied on myself as exactly a sort of walk the talk kind of thing, of trying to be more in that improvisation mode regarding what I do. Of course, there needs to be a balance. There are things that need to be planned, of course. So it's not about everything, but in what relates to this, like Artemis used to say, the art of living. I think it was him that said, it has to be improvised, in my view. And of course, not necessarily, saying that the other approaches are wrong or no, but it's something that I have decided to apply, and I've, got some good fruits, let's say, out of that process. And I've got to know myself much better out of that process. And the way I discovered that was years ago. I don't recall exactly how many. I was, formally invited to an interview on the podcast. And this was the first formal interview that I ever did. And I went into the mode of, take notes. I must remember to say this, must remember to say that. And I took notes, lengthy notes. I had a file of notes. Like, if he asks this, must remember to say that and whatever. And when I got there, when the interview occurred, I didn't follow a single note. Because the conversation went completely in unexpected places, and I had to improvise. Right? I didn't predict what he was going to ask, what it was going to be. So that taught me a very important lesson, to me at least. I learned that lesson, whether it was intentional or not. But I learned the lesson that there's no need for this mental personality level of over planning and over, predicting what is going to happen, and if this, if that, so on and so forth. You are equipped with the connection with your ego. You are equipped with the authority to decide upon an unexpected, and still act in accordance with your essential self. Yeah. And so, I agree. In summary, I agree with that idea of being like a child and have fun. And have fun, of course, life isn't just about having fun. This has to also be said. There's a balance to all things, and there are times to be serious. There are times to be, to have fun and so on and so forth. But it is, in fact, a good sign of, a healthy presence, that you find an authentic and honest sense of humor. Of course, many people mask their issues with a fake sense of humor. That also happens as well. But when you see that the sense of humor is genuine and that people can honestly have fun, that is usually a good sign that that they have some internal, established connection, if you like. I agree.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. And so this idea that we're jumping back to the social contracts and some of this externalizing of this authority, and we've touched on AI, and now we're moving into fully automated. Well, the contract itself is in some ways an externalization. Then you have the social contract, then this smart contract, right? It seems like we've given all of our agency, all of our, we're handing over our will. I don't mean the men on this call, but I just mean in collectively, it seems that we're just one after another turning over our will, which, it's in the yogic chakra system, the will is manipura, or the fire of the third chakra, it's bustled in right next to the heart, which we've already identified is synonymous with the sun, Jesus to Parat, which is the intermediary to that to which we truly are, our essence. And so by giving away our will, externalizing that, it's my goodness, man. So going back to this mutation, or I think Stylus early, half hour ago now, he asked the question is do we outgrow kind of this need to the mental characters outgrow this, and that's where you got in. There are these false memories, and then you suggested, well, they mutate, and they're being mutated on purpose, so that kind of keeps everybody on their toes, and so that truth can't emerge, right? There's always something new that's kind of a false truth, that's put into place to keep us off the path of truth. And so what's the what's the end game here, guys? What's where are we heading? What's the yellow brick road? Are we on our way to the Emerald City? And is Toto gonna see behind the curtain, or what's bust out your crystal ball? What's going on?
It's true that even though we're able to observe the falsity, we still have to deal with it. Right? That is true, because everyone around us, or almost everyone around us, believes those false memories and acts in accordance with those false memories. And so we have to deal with them, and therefore we have to deal with those memories. But internally, which is, our temple, no one can get in without being invited. The idea of the vampire that you have to invite in, right? No one can come in to your inner temple without being invited, without you inviting them there, and without you even, preparing a room for them to live in. So the fact that you have to deal externally with the conditions or the context that stems from those false memories that affect those around you does not mean that you internally can't be free from them internally. Okay? The external context is always relative to a certain connection, but then you also can act willingly or unwillingly as a sort of example to others in that regard, right? Doesn't mean that you're going to go and cause scenes in in public buildings or whatever, trying to wake people up, that kind of thing. But it means that just by being freer inside, just by being in connection with an inner authority inside, you act as even inadvertently as an example to others, and they eventually find you, and they eventually listen, or start noticing that there's something there.
You act as a latent social pathogen.
Exactly.
Undetectable. A superbug, if you will. We are the superbugs.
The superbugs, yeah. The disease X. But
Disease X, yeah.
yeah. But another thing that I would like to mention regarding what that you mentioned the AI, and one of the things, I don't know if you were already in the call when I mentioned it to Silas, was that you could define a mental personality as an original AI, because it is a completely programmed, automatically running personality. And usually what happens is that the ego, when the context changes and that program, let's say, is no longer necessary for that or appropriate for that context, changes the program. So changes one character for another, changes one personality for another. And this stems from the ego, right? So the AI God that is supposedly being built will act as the God of all of our AIs. So the God of all the mental personality, not the God of the egos, not the God that the essence is, but the God of the abandoned mental personality. It will try to take the place of the essential self externally, right? And so what happens is that, and you already see this even on Discord discussions, you already see people asking the AI what they should answer, right? And you see copy paste of AI outputs in something as insignificant as Discord discussions, right? So imagine this on a daily basis, all the time. Okay, everyone all the time asking the AI what they should do to decide for them. This is a complete externalization of an ego, and the AI will represent an externalized version of the essential self that only works for abandoned mental characters.
The oracular Armunn.
Right, exactly, the Ahriman. Not the Armunn, okay, but the Ahriman.
Yeah, we have to make that distinction. We don't want to get that mixed up. There's something actually I wanted to ask you, Armin, and this ties in with what you're asking as well, Noble. Again, I take basically, my opinion is, pardon me, if you want to know what's going to happen, you don't really. Again, this is just my opinion. You don't really have to look very far. All you have to look into is really the Zohar. Of course, not across the entire 4,500 pages, give or take, right? It doesn't mention it in its entirety, but it gives it lays out certain key milestones that are to be brought about. Again, it's very. We talk a lot about this idea of the fractality of all things, and this idea that existence is like a matryoshka doll, the Russian nesting dolls. But in this case, it really is. Pardon me. In the case of the Zohar, it really is quite illustrative of that concept, which you see within this again, and even plainly states it within the Zohar, where it mentions, those who resist global change must have global turmoil inflicted upon them, so that they may change. And in those times, when the grand king of the world, right, the Messiah or the Holy One, when he comes forth, he won't, and it even states this, he will not be a moral figure. He will not be a figure of pure good. In fact, he may, it seems to intimate in that verse, he may not be a figure of good at all. That he may be, in fact, a destroyer. And you see this within the Aquarian age, right? Aquarius was traditionally under Saturn. Saturn, and it is it has a benevolence to it. Pardon me, a benevolence to it, but largely it's a malefic instantiation or a malefic principle. And there was something I was writing about this recently. I'm still constructing my the golden age of Saturn's America, but it stated in ancient Italy, the harvest time belonged to the god of reaping, whom the Romans called Saturn. It was also associated with Mars in a more ancient sense, even for the Romans. I mean, Mars itself for the Etruscans was Marvor, which is a compound of two Italic words, which basically means master of the cutting, which is a similar idea to this idea of the reaping, right? So whom the Romans called Saturn, a symbol curved like his sickle. Even on this idea of Saturn, you have in terms of the word, for example, it was connected to the idea of the Hebrew word sator, right? Literally, or sitir, that sort of pronunciation, literally means hidden, right? And of course, we even have Pompeii at the time, when Vesuvius in 79 AD, 79 AD, I believe, erupted. You had a strong Jewish community there. Because, well, in that region up to Rome, you had the likes of the Jupiter Sabazios cult, which is, I mean, ultimately directly from Kabbalistic origins, the Yahweh Seviot, Yahweh, Lord of the host, Lord of the army. And of course, there's some various, I guess you would call them symbologists, esotericists, and archaeologists as well, that have stated that potentially the Jewish community in Pompeii at the time, where they find the oldest Satyr square, Satyr Arepo Tenet Opera Rotas, which, by the way, is still used in masonry and all of these Kabbalistic offshoots, they state that it most likely derived from this community in that area. And it makes sense because Satyr was an appellation meaning hidden, right? We even see it as an appellation used to refer to Yahweh in Isaiah 45:15, where the phrase hidest thyself or hiding himself is mistator, right? That's the Hebrew word. And so again, that links to mystery. And the inclusion of mysterion, right, or having knowledge or gnosis of the mysterion of Christ, right, within the New Testament, the Greek of the New Testament. And in Isaiah 45:15, it states, "Truly you are a God," referring to Yahweh, "who has been hiding himself," the God and Savior of Israel. The God of Israel is, I mean, you can trace this back. It's linked to El. El is linked to Saturn. You've got all of these other interconnections with the Saturn or Cronian Egyptian equivalent of Geb or Keb. Even Keb himself. That term is also found in Hebrew, where we see that Keb means to die, to perish, to become extinct. So it's this same idea as the harvest of souls, that Saturn, during that time of the apocalypse, again of the Revelation, right? He goes down at the sort of depth of night of the world, where the world is undergoing that dark night of the soul, and he engages in that harvest, that destructive process. Again, this is perhaps all metaphorical, relating to this notion that, again, what we see within the individual microcosm is also found within the macrocosm. This is what the monad symbolism means, right? You have the outer macrocosmic circle and the inner microcosm of that dot, right? Or the microcosmic circle in the center of that. So again, everything is a concentric circle, a concentric ring, compartmentalized in that sense, like a conspiracy. That's also, by the way, another appellation of Saturn, Anglometes, which is where, of course, we get our term angle from, but it means crooked, quite literally.
Mhm.
But in the context that it's being used as an appellation for Saturn, or Kronos as well, rather, more primarily, Anglometes means the one who plots in darkness, right? So this is all tied in really with this Aquarian age and the age that we're going into, and it ties into. Sorry for this long-winded answer, but it ties in. And I want to get your take on this, Armunn, because I think it ties into the Tower, the Tower tarot card and its symbolism and such. I was at this CIOB event today. It was a sort of conference, and again, CIOB means, and it's a UK based institution. It means the Chartered Institute of Building. And of course, it's, sign of the times. It's headed by basically ugly. I'm really. This is just realistic in terms of what I observed. Ugly, middle-aged, very. They look rather. They've got that sort of resting bitch face on them at all times. Middle-aged liberal white women, right? And I mean, they're.
I have to look up what the resting bitch means, but
it's they have that look of contempt constantly on their face,
right.
for the
Okay.
world, for everything, for perhaps their life itself. There's something going on deep inside their souls. Anyway, we were to do a presentation. And the presentation, of course, was to create a universal sort of model of a house, right? Not in terms of a model as in a three-dimensional model, but a model in terms of what you would use in terms of material, construction methodology, all of this, that had to be sustainable. So it had to be, had to correlate and be in keeping with sustainability principles and such, right? So anyway, we got up there and we did the presentation, and of course, what you have to understand is, again, when you're in construction, especially in these managerial positions of construction, when we talk about sustainability, they already have preconceived notions, like what you're saying, Armunn, the false memories. So they have these preconceived notions of what is sustainable. Now, I chose an aluminium frame. Firstly, aluminium's far more malleable than steel. It doesn't oxidize in the same way because it's from bauxite ore. It costs more up front to manufacture and such, but it creates a more lasting product because the oxidization that occurs with aluminium doesn't flake or destroy the rigidity of aluminium. It actually enhances it with aluminium oxide. So again, it makes it more robust long term, like Roman concrete in certain ways. And of course, again, like anything, if you create a supply chain around something, the way a market economy functions, typically the material cost will come down, the manufacturing cost will come down, and innovators who are, of course, they're in that now set up an established market of, in this case, aluminium production and installation, they can more easily innovate, or they're more predisposed to innovate in terms of lowering the costs of manufacturing aluminium and such. We have to remember at one time, cement, concrete and steel, because concrete was rediscovered, it it was a niche market in the beginning. Niche as in it cost quite a lot. I mean, it wasn't as streamlined in terms of the manufacturing processes, the manufacturing costs. Again, there was no market really built up around it. It was still a novel technology. So I mentioned that, and they stated, well, thought you would have mentioned something about shipping containers. Now, there's a part of me that understands the 48 laws of power. This sort of ties in with what you were saying, Armunn, about hubris. This sort of hubristic drive of pride, right? And how it always leads to the fall. And again, the first law of the 48 laws of power is never outshine the master, right? Don't try and oppose the hierarchy or oppose the false memories, because like the white blood cells, the ferocious white blood cells of the body, it will sort of leap upon you, no pun intended, in terms of what you're going through, Armunn, or rather your cat.
It's their survival at stake. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. So they jump on it like a bitch on heat, and they try and snuff it out. But anyway, they mentioned, I thought you would have mentioned something about, shipping containers. Now, for anyone who doesn't realize it, there's this crazy notion that basically comes from these really out of touch, echo chamber like broodmares of the neoliberal world order. I mean, there's no other way to describe it, really, right? Where they believe that utilizing ship containers, recycling them, is a good way to solve the housing crisis. Now, I shouldn't have said this, but I did. And it sort of just blurted out. And I mentioned to them that, again, I've looked into this. I know, because I just wanted to look, it crossed my mind when they were talking about ship containers. And I was saying to myself, well, if you've got a growing population, why the hell would you want to use ship containers? Which is, you would think it costs quite a lot to produce these, right, in terms of the steel and all of this. Why would you want to take the surplus of ship containers, or perhaps not even a surplus, which services the logistical needs of the growing population, for, to sort of satiate the virtue signalling of as I said, a bunch of broodmares of the neoliberal insanity. And so I looked into it years ago now. So it was, I just knew it. I knew the facts surrounding it. If you look at the number of shipping containers worldwide, and this is what I mentioned to them, and this is the reason I advised my entire group against it, is because the number of shipping containers is between, now again, we don't really fully know, but we know it doesn't exceed 170 million, right? Some people actually state it's only about 17 million shipping containers actively in use. Now let's just assume 170 million, right? Now, if you take about 1 or 2% of that 170 million is then decommissioned or lost at sea, right? But let's just be generous here for talking's sake and say the 100% of the 2% of that 170 million figure is totally decommissioned. It can be used for repurposing, for construction, modular construction, and creating houses they believe on the cheap. It's not actually, but whatever. If you do the maths, because it takes 3 shipping containers for one house, for one 2-bedroom house. If you want a 3-bedroom, it's about 4 shipping containers, right? Stacked one on top of each other, of course. You have a row of 2, and I call them 2, and so 2 rather. And so you could, and it's only 1 year and 330 houses per just in perspective. Then means to 96 home party to global eye. UK alone, about 688,000 people are functionally homeless, or they're, you know, it's sort of they're couch surfing, or they're in inadequate or temporary accommodation that doesn't suit their needs and doesn't suit you know, normative Western living. So I that is the insanity. That's not just at the helm of the construction industry. The total out of touch, unrealistic, completely over, you know, one flew over the cuckoo's nest. Those are the people at the helm of not just the construction industry, but probably every industry. So you have this idea of the competency crisis, and this is what I want to ask you, Armunn. I'm sorry for going on a bit of a tangent here, but what is producing that? What is producing the hubris? What is producing that competency crisis, that need for it? I mean, yeah.
Well, first I would say that in response to that, you could make a model where basically you build houses with by recycling toilets. So you reuse toilets. You know, they can be made for chairs and that kind of thing. And you don't even need to the biomaterial. You know, the biomaterial is also in that sense recycled, of course, as a joke. But regarding your question, that is due to the mutation of the false memory. So to mutate a false memory, you have two options. One is you wait for it to crumble, which is in a sense of control, not the best option, because a lot of unexpected results may emerge from it. Or you can control demolition, right? You need to control demolition, the previous false memory, in order to then build back better a new false memory out of the ashes of the previous one. So I think that what is happening now, in all those respects that you mentioned, is a controlled demolition of the previous false memory. And some people are clinging to the previous as if the previous was true. You know, and this is usually a very common fallacy of saying, like, oh, we're too liberal now, the conservatives were, you know. And when you get to a conservative, you would say, oh, we're too conservative, the liberals. Right? So you go from one extreme to the other, and you cling to the other extremity, right? Or the other, you know, extreme a factor of these twofold ideas. But in essence, and answering your question directly, what is going on now in terms of the competency crisis and that kind of thing is nothing short of a controlled demolition of the previous false memory that establishes as the foundation of the civilization we've had in our lifetime. So all of that is being removed, be it, you know, even at the idea of biology level, you know, that man is not necessarily man and woman is not necessarily woman, that kind of thing, but also stemming to other cultural and even skill-based aspects of that civilization. And again, this is not to say that the previous false memory was true. It is just to say that it is best for them, for the system, to bring it down in a controlled fashion, in a way that they can direct and control, than to allow it to crumble by itself. Because allowing to crumble by itself can bring about some unexpected factors that make them lose control. And that is why, again, being in a position of power determines that you eventually go into paranoia. And paranoia means that you want to control every single step of the way, even if even a change of things. So you want to make sure that it's you bringing it down in a controlled fashion, other than waiting for it to crumble. If you see that the house is already, more or less crumbling, you prefer to bring it down yourself, because
Great
then you
reset.
know, right? Then you know how it's going to fall, where it's going to fall, who is it going to affect, so on and so forth. And from the
Controlled demolition.
correct. And then from the ruins of it, you build the other false memory, which is as false as the previous one, but is sold as the new truth and the new thing.
But this is this idea that I think I mentioned a wee while back, and it's this notion of the tree. And the tree is almost like it's hemi-parasitic, meaning it parasites on its from its own members, right, from its own constituent parts. So it parasites from in the case of a deciduous tree, it parasites on its or parasitically nourishes itself rather from its own the leaves that fall every autumn, and obviously biodegrade into mulch. So it gains sustenance almost in a cannibalistic manner through that way. Of course, you could make the case that every system known to man works in a similar manner. We have something now as well where, for example, my friend, I say my friend, my acquaintance in the college class, he doesn't want to go to university. He just wants to go right into a job. So he's done 2 years at college, and instead of going to university for another 2 years, he was talking to Balfour Beatty, which is a large construction contractor in this country and the UK as a whole, probably in the continent as well, partially. And they mentioned to him that he could do a 5-year apprenticeship. Now, in the 5-year apprenticeship, you basically make about, barely just above minimum wage, right? It's about £21,000. So basically, you can't even really survive. If you actually look at those 5 years, the 5 years itself is that's quite a large percentage of one's working life, right? It's quite a substantial amount where you're basically scraping by, socio-economically, and of course, they're not. You're sort of going into, again, like what you're saying, Armunn. It's almost like the system's going into a hyperdrive of paranoia, where they're getting to the point where they're trying to break down everything to ensure that no one, that we're all writhing in the mud of our own despair and our own socio-economic iniquity, right? Where we can never get ahead in life. There's no upward mobility. Again, it's like they've won the game of snakes and ladders, and now they're populating every square with snakes and pulling up all the ladders. And it almost seems, again, like the Tower Tarot card. This is how every great civilization falls. And another reason as well is this belief of eternal preeminence. What I actually noticed with the liberals and the neoliberals, especially those sort of corporatists, or managerialists today, in that presentation room, they are almost conservative. They are conservatives. She mentioned as well, when I brought up the aluminium thing, well, how can the poor countries afford this? And I had to actually remind her that it's actually, and she was referring to Africa. She was referring to those regions, right, of the global south. She says, how can the poor afford this, right? And they almost say it with this type of, see, I think there's a deep psychological rot in a great majority of the Western populace in general. But if you look at, for example, the Western woman, because there is, and again, this isn't picking on women individually, but just as a whole, from what I observe as I guess you could say, as a philosophical insight. And again, men are going through a self-same thing, but it's of a different condition. It's a different quality. But you see with women, because they're having less children or having no children at all. I mean, about, I think it's single income, no kids. That category of women above 30 years old, I think it's about 50% of women in the UK are can be described as that currently. So you're going into that territory where they need the outlet, again, like your cat, no offense, Armunn, where it has that drive, that instinct. It has to express it in some way. And of course, it expresses it in the way of, I don't know, DEI, or using container ships, protecting the sacred cow of the container ship, the ship container, pardon, is a virtue signal of recycling. Things like that, and this idea of the poor, right? I mean, for God's sake, can we get beyond this sort of imperialistic 19th century idea, which of course, as I've mentioned, even the liberals have. They have this in common with the conservatives, where the global south are not some sort of damsel in distress. I mean, they almost rival us in some aspects, maybe not the US, but certainly in the UK. The UK is long, long gone. We're not even living on the fumes or the coattails of our past glories. I mean, those days have now passed as well. I mean, we're struggling to get by here. I know, because I sort of keep up to date in terms of how many houses are being built. I think there was about 243,000 houses, give or take, built last year in the UK. Now, if you take out the social housing, only 10% of those were actually, the private ones, were purchased by people, which tells you people don't have actually the money to maintain this this volumetric purchasing of houses or new things. Lots of financing, you have the subscriber economy, all of this. Again, it's pushing us gradually, incrementally, into this totalitarian system. But in a deeper psychological sense, it's it really is this. We're pretending. We're a society of the pretense in the West. Again, if you paint the container ship pretty colours, as they do, you can get past the fact that it's a cold, rusting, basically a slave, a slum dwelling, right? A shanty construction.
That's why I mentioned the idea toilets.
Yeah.
To make houses, right? Because that would be the idea behind this, right? So,
yes.
But yes, it is. We are in everything being brought down in a controlled fashion, and so my advice would be to observe it, in taking a step back, and not holding on necessarily to any of the sides, be it the side that wants it to go down and the side that wants to hold on to it. Neither side. Just observe it, and be aware of yourself, and be establish your own connection in the thing, in the field, let's say, that you have responsibility in, which is your own psyche. Yeah. Your own psyche is your own responsibility. And again, like I've mentioned before, the vampire has to be invited in, right? They don't need, a rent-free space in your psyche. Or better, you don't need them to have a rent-free space in your psyche. So this does not mean to, completely switch off and not be aware of what's going on, but it means not to get psychologically, emotionally, etc., involved with something that it's not really your field of responsibility.
Yes.
You are
Well,
responsible only for your, yeah.
There's no change in it, is there? There's absolutely no change in it. And there was
No,
something else. There was something else I was wanting to mention in terms of Saturn, and it's this link with Dionysus, and we can link Saturn and Dionysus and Bacchus and all of that through multiple means, right? But again, just tying this into comparative mythology, right? And in the clown world, right? This idea of the clown world, and again, I don't think this is by accident. None of it is. Even Pepe, the idea of Kek, a god of darkness, but the frog as well was after the Nile flooded, or again after the Negredo, the disorientation, the confusion, the deluge of death, if you will. There was a renewal, a revival, a revivifying of the spirit of the land. Again, which was symbolized, that was typified by the quintessential symbol of the frog. And interestingly as well, you have Dionysus linking to Geb. Dionysus literally means lame Zeus, or little Zeus, but typically lame Zeus. Geb, or Keb, the Saturnian equivalent in the Egyptian pantheon, means lame one or stumbler, right? And again, this probably has itself. I have theories regarding what what lameness means in its semiotic terms, but I can't pronounce this because obviously it sounds very much like a slur, should we say, in English. But it's the N word. I'll just roughly in the Kemetic language, I'll roughly spell it out: Nggoor, right? However, the ancient Egyptians pronounced that, right? But that was an appellation, an epithet of Geb, of the again the Egyptian Saturn, and he was known in that appellation as the Great Honker, as he was associated with the Egyptian goose, right? The Alopotian Egypticus. And of course, this links with the Cygnus and the winter triangle and being at the apex of it and all of that. But the Great Honker. And interestingly, what did we have? We had Honkler the Clown, which basically was at the forefront, the vanguard of this meme assault of the clown world, right? The clown world meme. And it being completely cemented and entrenched in the Western zeitgeist. So you have this idea of the circus itself, right? Not to become entangled in the circus.
Correct. And addressing what you mentioned, the revivifying, if you like, which also occurs organically, and we are proof of that. Just by having this conversation, we are proof of that. I would say that I don't know if you recall that in previous conversations, my observation was that at the end of each cycle, even a controlled demolition cycle, there's always loss of fuel. Remember that when I said that? Because loss of fuel emerges from people who got rid of the false previous and did not subscribe internally. It doesn't mean that they don't have to deal with it externally, right? But internally, they got free also from the future false, right? And so the system eventually loses fuel, because fuel is attention, dedication, devotion, even when you offer room for that quote unquote vampire inside of your psyche, because you invited it in, right? And again, I also reaffirm a thing that we mentioned, or that I mentioned in the one, which is a con man can sell you a counterfeit thing, but you bought it, right? So
Yeah.
to say that he sold me this counterfeit, yeah, but you bought it. You didn't look at it properly, right? You didn't, you know, really entirely organically look with your ego, with your decider, with your authority, internal authority. You didn't look at it. All the signs were there. Like, if you remember, of course, you pointed that movie to me. If you remember the movie Heretic, there's a point in which Hugh Grant says, "Do you still believe that my wife is in the next room after all the signs?"
Yeah.
Right? Because they were still like, "Oh, could you ask your wife to come out and whatever?" I mean, I will go in and ask her if you still believe that she's in the next room after signs. But you know, so he sold them, but they bought, right? They bought the entire situation. So the release always occurs. The release, the loss of fuel, etc., always occurs to an individual.
But
And
oh, sorry, finish your point, Armunn.
No, I was just going to say, do say your point, but I was going to say in a few minutes have to go have dinner. I will need to leave the conversation soon, but go ahead and make your...
Just to really quickly make my point, and I'll jump off as well, but again, that idea of informed disbelief, right? Suspending one's own active judgment for a more sort of dormant view of things, right? But again, that is almost... It's the human condition itself. It's the instincts hijacking the sort of intuition. This is inherent to man, inherent to man's true self, where again we, for example, there was somebody, a psychologist showed. He was actually a hypnotist. In fact, it was Derren Brown that mentioned this, right? And he mentioned somebody, now again, whether this is true or not, who knows, but I found it interesting. He said, in terms of hypnotizing someone, when you bring someone into a hypnagogic state, for example, even when you have the handshake induction, he says the reason they go into that hypnagogic state is because, not because you entrance them or hypnotize them. He says, you're like what you're saying, you're selling them something, they're buying it, but the reason they're buying it is because you do something unexpected, right? Again, this is why you could call it, again, whatever we want to call it, the cathedral of neoliberalism. It has to be in a state of permacrisis, right? It has to be in a state of trying to find the heretic of the far right, right?
Yes.
And it just starts inventing ghosts. It has to be in that state, you know? Sorry, man, jump in.
Let me just make one final point before I need to go, which is you've brought a great point there with Derren Brown and what he said, because usually people tend to think that, for example, compassion, being a good person, being polite, etc. These are positive traits, right? But when you're in the face of someone that either tries to deceive you or is outright overpowering you, that is counterproductive. It is a healthy moment to make a stand. It is then a healthy moment to be unpolite, to be assertive, to be aggressive, even if necessary, right? And I'll give you an example. The other day, I got a telemarketing call, like we all do from time to time, right? And this voice on the other side, they have these voices, having an orgasm or something. And this voice was like, oh, our product and this and that. And I just stated, I'm not interested. But you haven't heard the offer. This is marvelous. This is... And I said a second time, I am not interested. Hang up now. oh, but this is marvelous. And then I was just like, which part of I am not interested did you not listen to? And she was like, she stumbled. She was like, what? And then I hung up. You know, you cut their flow. And this is a healthy usage, in my opinion, a healthy usage of whether you call it aggression or being unpolite or whatever, right? Because people have this idea that you have to always be polite, you have to always be, no. If you are defending a space that is your responsibility, you don't need to. You can be polite the first time. You can be half polite the second time. But the third time you won't be. Count to 3. Isn't that usually the the thing? Right?
3 strikes.
So, I just wanted to make that point because it is a very important point that he said. Like, he sold them the hypnotism and they bought it because they don't want to appear socially as non-participants, or that they're letting him down or whatever.
That's exactly what he said. He said they actually a lot of them played along with it. He says that's how your mind is the majority's mind. He said I could never be hypnotized. So there's a segment of the population that will never be hypnotized. It's because they hijacked that veneer, that psychic veneer of the instinct, if you will, or the id, right? That which is, I mean, the lowest basal essence of man. Again, like what you're saying, they want to be socially validated. So
and if someone is trying or actually exerting power, and you detect it, it is not a time to be polite. It is not a time to maintain a facade of, polite. No, that will only perpetuate the situation.
Yeah.
It will not resolve it. It will perpetuate it. But anyway, guys, I have to split.
I'm going ahead as well.
I really, really have to go now. So great chat. Thanks a lot, Silas. We'll stay in touch. And, well, greetings to Farce Value that has been listening as well for quite a while.
Hello, Farce. Yeah.
It's been really nice to hear you guys.